thank you too for joining the sixth session of the Open Design Guide Reading Club. Other people might join a little bit later. We'll see. But if not, we'll just be a super focused group here. I shared the uh, document with the notes
Yep.
and a few things I put in here. So I opened 3 PRs now for revising chapters 2, 3, and 4. They're all
Mm-hmm.
ready for review.
Okay.
He told me, asked about how to review earlier, if it's better to do it in GitHub or Discord, which anything's fine. But I did record a quick 7-minute video about how to go to one of those PRs and actually review it. So I'm going
Yep.
to share that. It is shared. I shared it with her in the channel. It's also in the document. And it's literally like exactly like where to click, how to write your text, how to say, okay, I approve or I deny it. So it should be very focused on just the action and not like the bigger picture of GitHub, which would be never ending. And then leading into what we're talking about today, which is chapter 5, design process. I'll go
Mm-hmm.
over to the site. We have this handy content button here now on the homepage where we can see the whole table of contents. So as a
Are you
reader,
sharing your, sorry, Christoph, are you
yeah,
sharing your screen?
yes, can you not see it?
No, I can't see anything.
Ah, weird. Okay,
Yeah,
then
maybe just,
I will share the link with you.
okay. Yep, got it.
So like there's a little tab and it says covers and content. If you click to content, you just see the table of contents of all the chapters. So it's like
Nice.
right there. So, and reason why I bring it up is we should read the next chapter in the context of where a learner might be at right now. So I've got a quick intro about what open source is. I've learned about what the role of a designer might be in open source. Then I had this very practical getting started about finding projects, setting up tools, making contribution. Then we had collaborative workflows last week where we basically said we're going to ditch this content and make it more top level
Mm-hmm.
about the different phases that an idea goes through. At the beginning, you have like, there's just ideas in a forum and people talk about stuff, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
not in GitHub, right? That comes later. But then you might do wireframes and you use different tools. So how the collaboration changes based on these things. So, and there's a pull request with that updated content if you'd like to review it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we now go into the design process, right? So before we actually read this, now that you've had a little bit of context, what would you expect this page to be about from before you actually read anything? What would you think? What do you think you will learn?
Mm-hmm.
Or what would you like to learn? What answers do you have? Questions do you have?
Mm-hmm.
I think my first question is, how does a design process for open source differ from a design process that I might already know
Mm.
or like have some concept of? And maybe connected to that, like what are evidence-based proven processes that, however you want to quantify, get results in open source? Like, is there
Uh-huh.
a particular methodology? Is there a particular kind of design that is most, I don't know, advantageous, like is going to be like most successful?
Mhm. Okay, so pick you up where you are, right? Connected with your current situation as a designer who may have done design elsewhere in other contexts,
Mm-hmm.
and then just give you all the right tips to make a difference and be effective.
For me, I'm only looking at the high level overview. Everything seems very linear. I like that. So it's like the adapting, conducting research, gathering, implementing, and then this balancing innovation with backward compatibility without reading the content. For me, that almost doesn't fit in there. I would almost just go straight to documenting design decisions and then I would go to conclusion. So maybe the content there, just maybe the heading just changes or something. Um, it's only that one that doesn't make sense to me in this linear flow. And that's it.
Yeah, you might expect that, oh, wow, this is mentioned in the table of contents. This must be a really big deal, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. How...
Is backward compatibility something that most like new designers like have ever encountered as like a term?
I'm not familiar with that term. That's why
Right.
I wasn't, I didn't understand what the section is about if I
This is
just read
actually a
it.
really big deal in Bitcoin, because the protocol, there cannot be ever any changes that would make any of your Bitcoin or transactions from 15 years ago invalid. So the backwards compatibility is crucial to that one, right? With other projects, you're like, we're going to change the database, we're going to mess things up.
Yeah.
But here you can't. So it's a
Is it
Bitcoin, it's
Maybe
a big deal.
is it kind of like dependency, being aware of like how design might affect a certain dependency
Mm,
in that sense?
I think it's more like the psychological thing that people are always antsy about, is like, oh, we're going to break people's habits and patterns. They're going to be so ineffective type of deal. It's like, oh, I don't know
mm,
where this button is anymore, which people who use Figma probably recently experienced, but also people who use iOS experience all the time. They just
Right.
redesigned the whole Photos app. Like, it's very common. It's not as big of a deal as I think designers sometimes make out to be. But anyways, how about we start from the beginning
yeah,
and just
let's
read
start.
through this whole thing?
Let's go for it.
I had totally ruined my first impression, because I cannot really speak to that, because I'm just so close to the content. So I have
Right.
nothing to add to the pre-reading experience. Who would like to start? Or should I?
I'm happy to start. I haven't joined in on the other calls, so I'll go ahead and start. If
All
that's
right.
okay with you, Errol.
Thank you.
Okay, chapter 5, design process. I'll skip through the contents because we've gone through that now. Adapting design methodologies to open source environments. The open source world presents unique challenges and opportunities for designers. Traditional design processes often assume a centralized decision-making structure and a dedicated, co-located team. In contrast, open source projects are typically decentralized, with contributors spreading across the globe and working asynchronously. This environment requires a flexible approach to design methodologies. One effective strategy is to adapt elements of popular design frameworks like design thinking or the double diamond process to fit the open source context. Okay, one effective strategy is to adapt elements of popular design frameworks like design thinking or the double diamond process to fit the open source context. For instance, the emphasis on empathy in design thinking aligns well with the open source ethos of creating software that truly serves user needs. Similarly, the iterative nature of the double diamond process, moving between divergent and convergent thinking, suits the collaborative and incremental nature of open source development. However, it's crucial to recognize that these processes may need to be more transparent and inclusive in an open source setting instead of closed brainstorming sessions. Consider hosting open ideation threads on the project's issue tracker rather than private design reviews. You might hold public design critiques in the project's communication channels. Okay. It reads well in terms of explaining how working on open source design is different to working in maybe a more traditional design context. There's some sentences in there that feel like a bit of tongue twisters. It's the sentence with similarly the iterative nature of the double diamond process, moving between divergent content suits so it's that one that's just it's a bit too much. However, it's crucial you need to be transparent and inclusive. Yeah. Instead of consider hosting, okay, rather than give private design reviews, you might hold public design. Yeah. There were two sentences for me that were just a little bit too crunchy, if I can use that word. Yeah, it's definitely that one sentence there. And there was a second one, but I can't quite find it so quickly. But maybe if you guys talk, then I can find that one.
I don't know
Yeah.
I don't know how many people are familiar with the double diamond process. I don't know whether it gets like taught. But I
Yeah.
certainly I laughed when you read it out because I've never been able to use any design methodologies in open source projects.
Neither have I.
Right.
Like I'm now going on my 5th year, and the people that I've gotten to work with, there is no process. Like it is, we are Bitcoiners, and we will reinvent the wheel.
I think
So, you know,
it's, as far as I know from various open source projects I've been involved in, you can use bits and pieces of methodology, but like so it's not necessarily inaccurate to encourage new designers to introduce methodology to open source. Like I think that's a good thing.
yeah,
But I think setting the expectation that you could run a like double diamond process as like the design council kind of dictates you should
mm-hmm.
is like so far from reality. So I kind of want to reword. So this kind of art, one effective strategy is to adapt elements of popular design frameworks like design thinking or double diamond process to fit the open source context. So I would kind of rewrite the second bit to be more like for instance, the emphasis on empathy and design thinking aligns well with the open source ethos of creating software that truly serves user needs. Iterative nature of double diamond help, so these two sentences are true, but I think it needs like an additional sentence that says reiterate something from previous chapters, which is don't expect to follow a linear process.
Yeah,
I think that's the critical thing, is like linear. There is no, as far as I know, in most open source projects, there is no sense of a linear process. You will move around methodologies if
mm-hmm.
at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the, like all of these methodologies are sometimes big hypes. Design thing was this massive hype driven by IDEO with books and all this stuff, and then people overdo it, and then they got tired of it and hate it all of a sudden, and the next thing comes around. Same with agile and all of these other types of things. But you can learn a lot of these. Like I really hate the words divergent and what is it, convergent. I think they're just unnecessarily complex. It's just like sometimes you explore and you're in discovery and you make a big mess and you pick out the best pieces and then you like figure out your final solution. It's like it's just that but much easier.
Yeah,
But I feel like if someone comes from an agency background or so, they'll be like, okay, these are words I recognize. I've done these things. I recognize these things. And you're
yeah,
telling me I can adjust these and I can take them. So I think for that type of person, I feel like it kind of makes sense.
Well, I think the way that I would write the sentence is, as a designer engaging with open source software, you can't expect to dictate how a methodology or how a process happens. You can't go in there with an expectation of we're gonna follow the double diamond process,
right.
because it reminds me a lot of like Scott Jensen's approach to like when he first started coming into open source spaces, and he was like, this is how design is done well, through following these processes, and open source was like, get
Who are you?
lost. Who are you? And it's frustrating. So I guess like I want to avoid the frustration that designers might feel by like, they know that these methodologies achieve certain results when they're followed in a certain way, which is true. It's proven, it's researched, all that kind of stuff. But like, open source ain't gonna have it that way.
Totally depends on the people. Like so much it is about reading the situation, reading the moment, and just massaging a little bit here and doing something over there, and just kind of shaping the whole thing in like all these little gentle and sometimes harder ways.
But certainly if you come in like hard, we're going to follow this methodology,
It's just not going to work.
It's very anti-hacker, if you know what I mean. So if people are like very, the origins of open source was, you know, a printer hack, then the idea of following a methodology is going to kind of just not vibe with them, I suppose.
So I think another reason for all this stuff is like if you work for an agency and they charge you like $300 per hour or something, right? There's intense pressure on time. Like you get hired for these hours and you're gonna have to be accountable for every single one. You need a tight process that sounds
Yeah.
good, looks good, and kind of quickly gets you through all of this stuff. Open source is just different. It's just more iterative. It's just more communal. There's different pace. Sometimes it slows down, speeds up. You have very different set of pressures, right? And that's why you need to adjust the process accordingly, and it just doesn't fit right in the same way. But yeah, I mean, how much do we actually fit in there, right? Okay, but very good points. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Sorry, Mo, this next one might be something for you again, conducting user
I
research.
know.
Since you're
I
the
just felt that
pro.
right now.
Should we switch afterwards then? You don't have
Sure
to.
thing.
Yeah.
Conducting user research. User research is a vital component of any design process, and open source projects offer unique opportunities in this regard. Unique opportunities. Sorry, I'm just okay. Your user base is often right at your fingertips. That is true. I don't know if unique opportunities would be the right word. Your user base is often right at your fingertips, the community of contributors and users who are actively engaged with the project. Start by leveraging the project's existing communication channels. Forums, mailing lists, chat platforms can be rich sources of user feedback and insights. Pay attention to bug reports and feature requests, as these often highlight pain reports and pain points and unmet needs. Surveys can be an effective tool for gathering quantitative data from your user base. Many open source projects use platforms like Google Forms or Typeform to create and distribute surveys. When designing your survey, be mindful of the diverse nature of open source users. Your respondents might range from casual users to power users and fellow contributors. For more in-depth insights, consider conducting interviews with key community members. This could include longtime contributors, maintainers of dependent projects, or users who have been vocal about certain issues. These interviews can provide valuable context and help you understand the nuances of how the software is used in various scenarios. Usability testing in open source can be both challenging and rewarding. When you might not have access to a traditional usability lab, you can leverage remote testing tools. Consider using platforms like user testing or usability testing hub to reach a broader audience. Alternatively, you could organize community testing sessions where volunteers from the project community participate in usability studies. Okay. So AI wrote this. Oof, yes.
Is it
Okay.
is that comment due to like the complexity of the language, like the formal, or is it about the content of what's
It's
written?
more like how realistic it is
Yeah.
to what I've experienced over the last 5 years. I would definitely say like I like how it's written because it's explaining that, you know, collecting research in open source is actually easy because the users are just volunteering information left, right, and center, and they're doing it with all of these channels. That's 500% correct. The surveys bit over here is not an effective tool. We've tried surveys time and time again, and it just doesn't stick with Bitcoiners because they're very privacy focused. So I would revise the whole survey section over there. They work, but it has a very low hit rate, unfortunately. And then
Would you recommend saying, so there's difference between broad surveys like, hey community, we want 500 people, rather than we're going to pick 20 people, we're going to reach them out individually, ask them about if they would fill this survey, and if they say okay, then we're going to send them the survey, more targeted. Is that
yeah,
maybe a tip?
Yeah, that works. So if it's a personal ask, then surveys work.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, like if it's 5 people contributing, then all 5 people would send 20 personal messages out to people in their personal sort of, area, because then those people are more likely to reply. But putting things on social media or in large forums, it just doesn't work, because it's affecting the quality of the data that you're collecting. You just don't know who's replying.
And there are too many scams.
There's just
Please
too many.
type in your private keys.
And then I like this. I feel like the last 2 paragraphs could be completely revised. And I'm happy to take on revising this, because I feel I haven't contributed to this open design guide because I've been running all over the place over the last 2 weeks. But this would be a section I would love to contribute to, because, like how we did in the Bitcoin Core, when we start with the initial group actual working on the project, we look at the prototypes together, then we move to a larger group, which would be maybe people from the community, and then we could even possibly move to a larger group. So it's just this own model of testing that we've come up with, which doesn't follow any textbook. And Errol, please go ahead.
I have a couple of things that I'd recommend. I think this section is like a really good start, though. It's like
Yeah.
I love that it exists, and I think it's got some of the key points there for sure. Leveraging existing communication channels is something that I don't think, thinking back to like my non-open source design experience, like I remember it being like a revelation that I could use customer support requests as like research. And I was like, oh, this is user research. The customer support team are doing user research in a certain way, and I can work with them. And I think that like existing community channels bug reports are similar to that kind of revelation. So that's good. I think that the bit about key community members and the bit about bug reports, there's maybe a little sentence needed that says, it's almost like a disclaimer that open source oh my gosh, open source chokes me.
Take it easy.
Open source, the people that are most vocal in open source are the ones with access and ability. So you're missing harder to reach users. So you're missing the needs of users that get stuck on the installation guide, that
Yes.
have a really shitty experience with the tool. Users
Yes.
don't want to use the tool for more than once. So like you're only, by using existing community communication channels and interviews with key community members, you're only researching with the most engaged.
100%. Fully agree. 500%.
And I think it's something to like reinforce for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, we have this usage lifecycle in the Bitcoin Design Guide from people who are unaware of your product, people who are aware of it, interested. Maybe they try it for the first time, they become regular users and passionate users, and you lose people at every step. Maybe the point is to point of that and make sure you get people at every step of this leaky bucket.
I remember, or something I often use when I talk to open source projects is I talk about the contributor user and users, like as different buckets of people, or like I define people that use the thing but don't contribute to the thing, and how, because there's often a desire in open source to convert the people that use to the people that use and contribute as well. So like there, anyway. But yeah, they kind of prioritize people that use and contribute as opposed to just use.
Right. Fully agree with you. Yes.
But yeah, I guess it talks about like casual users to power users, but maybe that just needs like in the third paragraph after surveys, it sort of mentions it, but that maybe needs to be a nuanced explanation of the meaning within open source.
Yeah, go ahead, Errol.
I think the last thing that I would say that this is missing is that contributing to research is a contribution. And so, like, I think this is maybe a little bit advanced, maybe. Like, I think a new designer to this concept might find that difficult to understand. So maybe it's in like an advanced user research in open source. But like the concept that you can count participation in research, a survey response as a contribution is like quite a important like revelation to communicate to an open source project. So like it can sometimes win projects over to design. Like, oh, it's a contribution. It's not, it doesn't have to, you don't have to call it user research, you can call it a contribution.
It's a good one.
And also, but I think the first paragraph leads nicely into it, is any traditional user research methodology you can think of, bring it into open source, and whichever project you're working with will break it. They will say, no, we will do it this way. So that's been my greatest lesson, and it's been a wonderful lesson. Don't bring in methodologies and think you're going to follow it step by step. But I think that's mentioned in the first half as well.
Just gonna copy a couple more things here. All the comments. And something I also wanted to point out is that would be good to know for editing. So I think it's this one. Is it this one? Aha. So just something to think about potentially if you're contributing content. So I'm in the pull request for chapter 2. I introduced 2 changes, like extra components in pages. One is an editor's note. Like I took out, they're in the success stories. It's like the same thing, elementary OS and like graphene or whatever. And it's like no one can relate to this. So I put in wallet scrutiny Mo, which you're a part of too, as one example, because that's an actual case study we have, right? So I could put it in. And then I added an editor's note as a request for content. We would like to showcase more examples of how designers help make improvements. More here. That takes you to GitHub. So maybe like the content doesn't pretend it's complete, right? It says here like we would like more content here. Please contribute. And the other thing is there's these little, in some places there are these small view resources, these little expandable things for additional links, because it's something we talked about previously too. So we can put like 50 links in there and it doesn't really interrupt the flow of reading. So if you have links to privacy preserving survey tools or anything else, each section can now have its own little subtle resource link section.
Sorry, Christoph, was that I missed this. Are you sharing this on the screen or?
Oh, you're still not seeing it. Okay.
No.
That's so weird. Okay, check out. So here, if you scroll to the very bottom of this page, you'll see a little thing that says view resources.
Okay.
And you can expand that for links. So previously, in other chats, we had the problem where it's like, okay, how do we add in all these links? At first, I put them in exposed and it's super ugly. And I was like, oh, this is not going to work. Interrupts the flow of reading. But with this component, we can like any links you have, like you can put them in there. You can provide all kinds of good resources. That was just a side thing while we're moving forward. So we can keep this in mind. Okay, so should I read the next one? Or Ariel, would you like to? I'm good. Okay, I'll do it. All right.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Gathering and importing feedback. In open source projects, stakeholders come from diverse backgrounds and have varying levels of involvement with the project. You might be dealing with casual users, power users, contributors, maintainers, and even representatives from companies that rely on the software. Interesting. Each of these groups may have different priorities and perspectives. To effectively gather feedback, it's important to create multiple avenues for input. This could include design proposals, share your designs early and often, use the project's preferred platforms, e.g. GitHub issues, wikis, to post design mockups and invite comments. Community calls. Many larger open source projects hold regular video calls. These can be excellent opportunities to present designs and gather real-time feedback. Asynchronous discussions. Set up threads in project forums or mailing lists for longer, more in-depth discussions about design directions. Design sprints. For major redesigns, consider organizing virtual design sprints where interested community members can participate in intensive collaborative design sessions. When incorporating feedback, strive for transparency in your decision-making process. Clearly communicate how you're prioritizing different inputs and why certain suggestions are being implemented while others are not. This helps build trust within the community and ensures that even those whose ideas weren't adopted feel heard and respected.
That's actually pretty well written. Sorry, go ahead, Errol. Yeah.
No, it's go for it if you've got
this just feels very practically well written in terms of how it's written. You know, share just it's working in public. I mean, basically, you know, and how to communicate. That's what it feels to me is the juice of this section. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would just add something to be very deliberate about giving different ways of giving feedback, allowing the right amount of time. Someone might not be comfortable on a video call. English might not be, it might be their second, third, fourth language. Maybe they can't even type, or like, there's all kinds of different ways people prefer or are comfortable or not comfortable in giving input, and they might take time. You might have, even if you hate it, you might have to wait 3 weeks until you can finally move forward, because that's just how the pace at which everyone can get around to things. And maybe they need to really deeply think about it, right, or talk to some other people, especially if like there are representatives of companies in there. So I think that is that sensitivity.
I think the only thing that this section is missing is what you say, Christoph, is the suggested boundaries for feedback. Because I think my experience in open source is, unless you give, like with anything to do with open source, unless you communicate clearly, I'm looking for feedback specifically on the aspect of the design that is doing this for these people in this way.
Yeah.
Because then you invite the "my mother doesn't like the color green" kind of comments. I showed this to my grandma and she doesn't like this shape. And so that avoids that. But also, I think the thing that it's missing is this time boundary. So like, after a few contributions to open source, I learned that here's a design, it's ready for this kind of feedback in these ways. Please comment specifically here in these specific ways. Like, letting designers know that it's okay to define how they want to receive feedback. Like, that's not a bad thing to do, as long as it's like within the realms of ability. Like, I would rather you all comment in Figma, and this is how you do commenting in Figma. Or I would rather you all make comments here until this date, and then we discuss these points on a community call at this time.
Yeah.
And what was the other thing? It's gone from my brain a little bit. And that it's okay to make design decisions. Like, I think one of the hardest things in open source is most of the time everyone's got an opinion on your design because they care about the thing.
Yeah.
But you do get to say, the reason that I designed it this way is because I'm a design expert. Like, regardless of how many years of experience you have in design, you are the design expert. And that often, I remember mentoring a lot of like designers new to open source, and they're one of their biggest challenges is like, well, all these people are giving conflicting feedback. How do I decide what to do? And it's like, well, what does your design knowledge and intuition tell you is the right thing to do here? And they're like, but I've only been doing it for a year. Should I really be telling these open source? And it's like, yeah, do it. So, oh, and like one thing from the designer diary studies was designers describe the best feedback as actionable feedback. So like when they want feedback on their designs, it's like, I want feedback that helps me make a decision on this choice. And then the open source people help you make a decision on that choice. So maybe it's about framing like actionable feedback. You can ask for actionable feedback, because I think it gets assumed.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Good section though.
I think that might deserve a whole page, this aspect
Exactly.
about presenting your work.
And I think you could write the page, Errol. Because
I would happily draft the page, and then in fact we could copy paste some of the stuff from the designer diary studies, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, we have about 20 more minutes and a few more sections. So I'll just read the next one. Implementing iterative design processes. So iterative design is particularly well suited to open source projects where software is often released early and updated frequently. However, managing iterations in a distributed volunteer-driven environment requires some adaptation. First, break down your design work into smaller, manageable chunks. Instead of proposing a complete overhaul of the user interface, for example, you might focus on improving one key interaction at a time. This approach aligns well with the incremental nature of open source development and makes it easier for the community to review and provide feedback on your work. Use version control systems like Git, here we go again, to manage your design assets. This allows you to maintain a clear history of your design iterations and makes it easy for others to contribute or suggest changes. Consider using file formats that are easily diffed and merged, such as SVG for vector graphics or HTML CSS for layout explorations. Establish clear milestones for your design work and align them with the project's release schedule if possible. This helps set expectations within the community and provides natural points for broader review and feedback. Remember that in open source, iteration doesn't stop once your design is implemented. Stay engaged with the project after your changes are merged. Monitor user feedback, bug reports, and usage metrics to understand how your design performs in the real world. Be prepared to make further refinements based on this post-implementation data. I feel like I don't really know how this fits in here. This feels a bit of a random. Okay, iterative design is good. It's very important. I totally agree with that. Breakdown design work. For coders, I think it's more like, okay, you can present the big picture, but you have to show how to break it down into smaller pieces, how to get there. And for development, it's like the same thing. In some companies, they're like, okay, and a task should not take more than 4 hours. That's like the smallest unit. And maybe design needs to be also the same thing. Maybe we can give an example there of how to do that. Version control system that goes back to documentation, which I think is important. But I think you don't have to like do pull requests or use files. Like something Mo you do well is whenever on a project there's an update, you just kind of paste the notes in an issue, and then you have this archive of stuff that you can come back to after a while. And it's just an issue. There's no coding, it's just text, but it is in the repository with all the code, with everything else. So I think that could be updated there. Establish clear milestones for your design work. I don't know if you're the one. aren't you actually aligning yourself with the milestones that the project has established?
Exactly.
I don't know. This seems
And it's
like I'm doing my
collaboration.
separate thing over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it sort of depends if you're doing like, if I would say if you're doing design research and it's exploratory and not like specific to part of like the function of an interface feature, then you could set your own milestones. If it's like, what's it called? Foundational research.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but it's so rare that I've set design milestones in
Yeah.
open projects. They've usually always adhered to the milestones of the open source roadmap if they have one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it depends on the release cycle. You know, Bitcoin Core, they really make a release every 6 months. Whatever's in there is in there. Whatever isn't, isn't, and that's it. And some other, projects treat it extremely differently.
I almost feel like the section that Errol would write would have a higher value than this section. This whole section could even be removed, or maybe that's a little bit too extreme, but yeah.
I think the part about being iterative is really, really important.
Yeah.
You cannot come to a project and just say, like, here's this whole redesign, do it,
Yeah.
or something, right? It's a lot, along with like designs emerging from all of this activity, it should kind of submerge itself again in the same way, like in little bits and pieces.
I sort of would keep the first two paragraphs, and then the sentence that says not, I would remove the reference to Git from version control, but I would reiterate from the I think we talked about version control briefly in one of the previous chapters, but like a reminder, make sure that you like save versions of your design or keep a historical log of like your designs as they've progressed, because I think there's this expectation from open source that your designs, like, you'll never, and I don't think it happens so much in design anymore where you design over a design, you do the duplication and then change the design, but sometimes it does. But I think make reminder of the version control is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're doing illustrations, it's super different than UX tweaks or so, right? Just kind of depends.
For sure.
Yeah.
Let me find the design sizing document that I made for an open source project.
Awesome. In the meantime, we have 3 chapters left,
Let's
paragraphs, and 13 minutes.
Shall I read the next one, Balancing Innovation?
Yeah, that's the weird one. The one that we're not
Okay,
sure
let's
about
go.
at the beginning. Yeah.
Balancing innovation with backward compatibility. Okay. Open source projects often have a large existing user base that relies on the software's current functionality. As a designer, you'll need to balance the desire for innovation and improvement with the need to maintain backward compatibility and avoid disrupting established workflows. Okay, so that makes sense now. So, okay. So you can be innovative and improve the design and the user flow up to a certain maximum, because you have to think about the technology behind the designs. This is how my brain is understanding it, but okay. When proposing significant changes, consider a phased approach. Introduce new designs alongside existing functionality, allow users to opt in to the new experience. This can help ease the transition and provide an opportunity to gather feedback before fully committing to a new design direction. Okay. Engage with the project's longtime users and power users. Their deep understanding of the software can provide valuable insights into which aspects of the current design are more crucial to preserve. At the same time, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo if you believe there's a strong case for change. Just be prepared to clearly articulate the benefits of your proposed innovations. Oi, oi. Okay.
Change
It's
management.
that Yeah. It's that word that it's that backward compatibility, I think maybe we can try to think of some other way of understanding or rephrasing that. Um, it's like you can be innovative, but your innovation has to match the underlying tech, because if it doesn't, there's only so much you can innovate um, based on the underlying technology. That's kind of what it feels like, but I don't know how to reword it to something
Mhm.
simpler.
But it's also not just a design problem. The technology changes too, and sometimes they make
Right.
break-in changes, and something from 3 years ago becomes not supported anymore. And so tech just keeps moving. It's not just a design thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe reframe it to take users along for the ride, or
Mm. For yeah,
would you rephrase it, or would you make more drastic changes?
I would just rephrase. I'm not feeling the rephrase right now.
Okay, so we talked about
It's
iterative design process, right? And
yeah,
iterating helps take people along with those changes. So it kind
exactly.
of builds on top of that. So maybe it's not, maybe those can be merged, those two.
Yeah, it could even be design in phases. Maybe that could be the title. I don't know. Because you're iterating in phases, and then you're introducing design innovation also in phases, because sometimes there's incompatibility with the underlying technology.
I think there's value in keeping like this phrase of balancing innovation, because I'm channeling a different kind of designer than I am.
Mm,
I'm channeling the new designer in an agency that is like primarily like, and like designers in university, although things may have changed, are like all about designing new, cool, shiny, innovative things.
yeah,
And like it's the prevailing big tech message, right? Innovation, innovation. And I
yeah,
think it can be like a bit of whiplash when you come into the open source space and it's like, I've got all these ideas that's going to make this tool so much better and usable and designed better. And then it's like, whoa, 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 we can't change that because of this dependency or this need for the backwards. And it kind of, I think that by keeping the balancing innovation message, it does prepare designers for that potential of like projects. Projects have like, I would phrase it the way that projects are nervous about refactoring.
yeah.
Anything that sounds like a refactor. And I don't think the term refactor is something that designers are very familiar with until they kind of come into the software space. So, but I do think like the meaning of innovation and refactoring is sort of similar enough that you can use them interchangeably here.
Mm-hmm.
So, like maybe it's balance of innovation improvement. I would sort of use maybe more chatty language in this section, saying I often describe open source as brittle, or like a series of like I would maybe even use an image. Maybe you could even use that one really famous infrastructure image, where it's like a very small, thin thing that's balancing other things, and it's like we can't change this, or we can't like make this fall over. Essentially, yeah. I think you know the one that I mean. It's so famous. I almost feel like this image needs to be in this somewhere because it gets like regularly referenced at open source spaces, like so regularly it's kind of a joke. But yeah, that's kind of how I would describe, like, there is a slowness, a brittleness, a carefulness. Like it's open source improvement is careful.
Yeah.
It's not move fast and break things. It's move incredibly slowly and prioritize the legacy code.
Yeah. Coming back to that point about patience, like 3 chapters ago. Okay, awesome.
Okay, we
So
have 5 minutes. Yeah.
okay, that was good, and that should flow into all these pages. So, should I read the next one real quick?
Go for it.
Okay, documenting design decisions and processes. In the open and collaborative environment of open source, thorough documentation of your design process is crucial. It helps others understand your decisions, facilitates smoother handoffs between contributors, and creates a valuable resource for future reference. Consider maintaining a design system or style guide for the project. This could include visual design elements like color palettes and typography, as well as interaction patterns and accessibility guidelines. Tools like Figma or Zeppelin can be used for creating and sharing living design documentation. So the PenPod comment there. For each significant design decision, document not just what was decided, but why. Explain the problem you are trying to solve, the options you considered, and the rationale behind your final choice. This documentation can live alongside the code in the project repository, perhaps in a dedicated design directory or in the project wiki. Remember that in open source, your design process documentation isn't just for other designers, it's for the entire community. Write in clear, approachable language and be prepared to explain design concepts to those who might not have a background in design. Seeing a couple of comments here. There's a heading missing from this chapter. I realized now of the section. It's perfect. Wow, I've not seen that before.
Yeah.
A perfect section.
All right.
Yeah.
Shall I read the last section, the conclusion then?
Conclusions are always a bit wishy-washy, but let's go.
They are. Designing for open source projects require flexibility, transparency, and a collaborative mindset. By adapting traditional design processes to this unique environment, you can create user-centered designs that benefit from the collective expertise of the open source community. Embrace the iterative nature of open source, be open to feedback, and don't be afraid to experiment. Your contributions as a designer can significantly enhance the usability and appeal of open source software, making it more accessible and enjoyable for users around the world. Everything there seems to be actually fairly okay. Aside from the last sentence, it just feels like it's a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, it always tries to round out like, yeah, you're changing the world.
It's trying to like
always tries to
round it
do that.
out and like overemphasize. It's like, okay, easy now.